we are preparing for a 2026 referendum on key proposals that emerge from these discussions. As most Albertans know, I have repeatedly stated I do not support Alberta separating from Canada. I personally still have hope that there is a path forward for a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. And while doing so, our government will work with Albertans on various initiatives to better protect Alberta's provincial sovereignty and economy from Ottawa should those negotiations fail and the economic attacks continue.
So we're back. Alberta wants to leave the country again. How come every time a conservative or a liberal gets into office, either Quebec or Alberta is like, I'm gonna leave, and then like the rest of the country is just like laughing maniacally like an evil partner as they eventually come like crawling back. But this time it's Alberta that wants to leave. Now, number one, I feel like I'm like the perfect person to talk about this. As a Manitoban, I live in a province with heavy cultural ties to whatever the hell Alberta is smoking, and I'm obviously a part of the Western provinces, but I'm also poor enough to get that equalization payment money, baby. This isn't going to be a video where I call everyone in this province a bunch of ignorant, horse-loving rednecks, more than once, because they all absolutely are. Go Oilers, yeehaw. And this isn't going to be a video where I stroke Alberta's ego and confirm our biases about French people, where I call them all a bunch of lazy, chain-smoking, wine-drinking, cocky rabbits. Which they definitely are. The Habs cooked it. So I did my research on this, and what I learned is that Western alienation in this country is a thing, and the Eastern provinces have to understand that and start doing things to address that. But also, that doesn't mean that Alberta's constant kicking and screaming and soiling their diaper makes any strategic political sense at all. Now, Alberta separatism actually started out mainly on the left. But before we get to that, did you know that becoming a tier 3 member could get you a channel shout out like Speaker over here? It also gets you channel badges, which look like the normal channel badges, but actually have a little maple leaf inside them instead of the star, which I think is really cute. Custom emotes that are all themed around Canadian politics, including, I know, some of the fan favorites like Zero Seats, W, La Freak, and the community favorite, Ford Keck. I love that one. So consider becoming a member and checking out Speaker's channel at the end of the video. Back to the video. Alberta separatism started out with the Social Credit Party. Now, to call the Social Credit Party left-wing is slightly misleading, but it's a really interesting party that I do wish still existed, so here's the breakdown. The social credit movement stemmed from the Great Depression and the wave of working-class populism and leftist economic theory that accompanied many movements of the time. Now, specifically, they came from the United Farmers Movement. This era, with its high wealth disparity and inequality, that, funny enough, also created what would later become the NDP, would make you think that its policies would be very labor-oriented and very proletariat, almost socialist. But where it differed from the NDP wasn't its fiscal policy and economic policy, but instead its social policy. Now, this movement's main proponent was Baptist William Aberhart, who went crazy on the radio like good old FDR over here. And it was because of his constant mixing of fundamentalist Christianity with the monetary theories of C.H. Douglas that this party really started taking shape. And if you're paying close attention, you'll realize that both of these parties and movements came from the Canadian West. Anyway, Alberta separatism and the large amount of isolation that came from the Canadian West birthed both the Social Credit Party, what would become the NDP, and the actual Albertan separatist movement. Now that I've effectively established this movement as not just a left or a right movement, I can start making fun of liberals. Because it's very common nowadays for the Alberta separatist movement to get angry at the liberals, whether it be Mr. Trudeau, or their economic advisors. And so it won't surprise you if I say that one of the big spats Alberta had with the Prime Minister was the prominent Liberal Prime Minister, Mackenzie King. But the attack wasn't from the right. It was because the Liberals weren't being leftist enough. The whole point of the Social Credit Party was to give some sort of relief to the Albertans. And they got in on that promise because of the negative feelings with the Liberal administration in Ottawa. Mackenzie King at one point said that he would not give a 5-cent piece to non-Liberal provincial governments for unemployment relief, which is such like a stereotypical Great Depression evil guy thing to say, but whatever. And when the Social Credit Party tried to issue a social credit or a prosperity certificate, the Liberal government said they couldn't. They said they found it unconstitutional and used the power of disallowance. Disallowance from Section 56 of the British North America Act of 1867. By the way, really cool fact, the BNA received royal assent on March 29th, 1867. 138 years later, I was born. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I'm Mr. Canada, bitch. Anyway, finally, in 1957, the Alberta government finally gave some sort of social credit. But do you know how they did it? Do you want to know how they did it? They did it with a public oil royalty dividend of $20 per person and $17 the next year. And we wonder why. But this brings up an interesting dilemma. As economies move away from oil, what happens to the economies who are trying to move towards it? All right, I'm going to say this now. Alberta oil is not the future. Let's look at this from an actual economic lens. Why would a company spend $20 billion to develop the land and make it possible to drill for oil, when Alberta has some of the dirtiest oil on the planet that is hands down the most expensive to extract and refine, with a break-even price sometimes of $75, all for an industry and a market that is expected to see negative growth, meaning in the next 5 years, the demand for oil is going to go down. How does this make fiscal sense? Oil is not free money from the ground, you dirt monkeys. Anyone looking at this from any sort of genuine lens needs to realize that this isn't good. We have a particular province that has a sizable portion of their population that want to separate, all of their economy is seeing a dip. And they think the solution to their problem is the exact thing that is slowly killing in this country. We have a very isolated but very extreme case of Dutch disease. Alberta's economy is a ticking time bomb that, if not handled very quickly and effectively, will not end up well. Just so we're all aware, 22% of Alberta's GDP and roughly a third of the jobs in this province are part of an industry that is on its way out. Alberta is right now more volatile than a teenager questioning their gender identity. You get it? Because like conservatives always make jokes about how like, oh, what's a group of trans teenagers? A suicide squad. So you might be asking, what do we do? Well, in this instance, I do think we need to treat Alberta like it's a separate country. With Donald Trump using tariffs to try to combat the American trade deficit, it's brought up a lot of people who are questioning their preferences when it comes to the carrot and the stick. China, a country known for trying to impose its will on other countries via force, has completely switched up its strategy regarding this issue. It wasn't that long ago they were trying to go head-to-head with Korea by restricting K-pop exports. I'm being serious. They actually reacted to an issue by being that petty. But now that Trump is currently trying to use the stick and slowly removing every friend it's ever had, China has switched up completely, working with Korea and hilariously Japan. Side note, do you know how bad you need to mess with Japan to get them to work with the Chinese? Japan committed like an actual Holocaust against the Chinese people. But in the case of Germany, they almost completely talk about how horrible it was, how sorry they are, how much they've given to Jews in reparations, how they banned almost every former government official from working in the post-war West Germany, and how you can't even do a certain Roman salute anymore. Japan doesn't care. They kept all the same old people, and they don't admit a goddamn thing. Now, because of this, China has constantly done things to mess with Japan, kinda deservingly, honestly. And broadly, this has created a brutal hatred from both nations. And even they're working together now. All because America started using the stick, and China has started using the carrot with other countries. They reopened Japanese fish markets in China, and they started flooding their market with K-pop. That's just two huge things that they started doing. And all they ask for in return is for both Korea and Japan to maybe work with us on a trade deal that cuts out the United States and makes them our enemy. That's all we want, guys. Basically the nice guyification of global diplomacy, where I do something for you with the heavy expectation that you sleep with me. Now, I think this strategy needs to be done with Alberta. So here's my strategy for an effective compromise that I think will successfully make both parties angry. Nuclear. All right, listen here, lefties. You have to hear this, all right? Don't roll your eyes at me, okay? This is an intervention. If I have to work with the AfD on this, I absolutely will. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done. I think the Canadian government should rapidly, and I mean rapidly, start building up nuclear power in Alberta with SMRs. Like rapidly. And then should use the profits from the first few years to issue a public clean energy dividend in the province. Like, how perfect would that be? It's divesting away from oil in a way that saves the economy of the province, that pays in billions of dollars, more than it receives in revenues. And it's the clean energy that left-wingers hate because they're dumb and stupid, which means that Albertans can keep their ego intact. And the massive economical benefits and perceived attention going into Alberta would slow down any talks of separation from the provincial government, thus benefiting the God King Emperor, Mark the Big Daddy Carney himself. I feel uncomfortable that I just called him that. Now, this would absolutely cost a lot of money, but we still have some time because oil isn't going away tomorrow. So even if it's expensive, we have to start doing something like this. Right now, every country that has a large percentage of their economy strapped up in oil is heavily divesting from it. Saudi Arabia has been plowing billions of dollars into anything but oil, raising their specific break-even price to $112 per barrel and taking out more debt in Q1 of 2025 than they ever have, totaling $30 billion. And you thought our deficit was bad. If you took this number and multiplied it by 4, then it would be a $120 billion deficit, or 11% of their GDP. They want the private sector to account for 65% of GDP, because right now it's only 40%. but 87% of government revenues and 90% of export earnings right now are oil related. They recognize the issue that Dutch disease is plaguing their economy and are fighting tooth and nail to fight it off. Norway has been a shining example of how to fight off Dutch disease and has, with their oil money, genuinely created a much better economy than they ever could have without it. So Alberta, this can be done. It will take a lot of money to divest into industries with a more profitable future. Even SMRs are stupid expensive and technically less productive, and getting the population on board will also be tricky and costly, much like the previous example of the public oil royalty dividends versus a green energy royalty dividend. Again, this is billions and billions of dollars that we're talking about right now. But I'm sure Alberta can do it. If the funny sounding snow people can do it, then why can't the rootinest, tootinest province there is do it? Alberta could cut some sort of deal with the federal government, using some of its oil revenues and a small fraction of federal money to do this.
Oh, what's that? Alberta doesn't even make as much money from oil as Saudi Arabia or Norway does because they were too busy cucking out to corporations to do anything that Saudi Arabia or Norway did to make sure that their oil money actually benefited the population. Like how Norway took its money and consistently over 70 years, a time span we no longer have access to, spent it on infrastructure and education, invested so much money into their own economy they had to set up a global pension fund, started paying Norwegian startups for their own research, not letting foreign companies do whatever they want by requiring 50% plus Norwegian crews, forcing companies to train and educate their citizens, making sure that petroleum needs to be brought on land for processing and can't be shipped directly to another country, making it easier to tax and also providing jobs, sharing survey data with the government, and forcing companies when they get an extraction license to extract all of the petroleum instead of just the really easy stuff to get, slowing down capital flight away to easier markets, like with what we saw in Alberta and Texas when all the oil that was spewing out of the ground got slurped up and meant that all the oil that was left was the really hard to get stuff. And of course, Saudi Aramco is a publicly held company, meaning that the government owns a majority stake in the energy giant and has for a while now, letting them do whatever they want with the money instead of just collecting royalties from the companies like Alberta does.
Wait, why'd that happen? I'm not saying I think this, but I'm starting to be open to the thought process that Alberta just doesn't care about oil regulations or anything regarding their own jurisdiction. They just want to decide the prime minister because big corporations and Americans have given them enough propaganda and riled them up enough about hating liberals that they're just acting like entitled kids who really, really want something, but it keeps acting like a brat, so it's not getting it. Now, I don't quite think that. Because like I talked about, there are plenty of times the federal government has stepped in Alberta wanting to do something or even stabbed them in the back. But let's not pretend that this is strictly related to liberals. After doing my own research, I've found that Western isolation and separatist sentiments obviously at all times takes on a right-wing flair, whether that be the socially conservative yet monetarily progressive Social Credit Party, the Progressive Conservative Party, and their reign over the province for years and dominance federally in the elections, or the modern Conservative Party like the UCP or the CPC. But this, I think, is dumb. Just like oil was at one point a solution, but one that Albertans have become addicted to, letting them increasingly get taken advantage of, and something that now holds them back more so than it keeps them up. While doing my extensive research on this subject of reading Wikipedia, some Reddit comments, and parts of a few books, plus my own knowledge on a few situations, I realized that conservatives almost never do literally anything for Alberta oil, like at all. Seriously, Diefenbaker did almost nothing, except for like the national oil policy, which divided Canada between the West, which would get Alberta oil, and the East, which would get foreign oil, so that's nice. Clark didn't do anything. Mulroney didn't do anything. In fact, it was Mulroney's awarding of a lower-rated and more expensive Airbus contract to some company in Montreal, even though Bristol Airspace, outside my door in Winnipeg, produced a cheaper and higher-rated bid, which made all of Western Canada so angry that it was the reason that led to the creation of the Reform Party. And if you're wondering why this has me angry, because my mom worked at Bristol Airspace. Look at this. And was a union member with the CAW, Local 3005. She even bought a shirt that she thinks that we lost, but I don't know how to tell her that we didn't. Also, I can't believe that the Bloc got so angry that when Winnipeg got a contract like 20 years later, they had the absolute gall to say that this was an attempt to shift the aerospace industry out of Quebec. How about y'all keep making cheese curds and we'll stick to making planes, my man? The Jets would smoke the Habs blindfolded. Y'all lost 4-1. Did you forget a skate? But finally, we got Stephen Harper, and he did almost nothing.
Oh, he streamlined some environmental regulations in an omnibus bill. Give me a break.
Western isolation is an issue, and the concerns from Alberta that are creating a separatism movement also need to be addressed. But separatism can't just be a tool every single one of you play every time your favorite color doesn't win an election. Take a step back and ask yourself, what have the conservatives done for you? I do kind of like that Pierre sort of care about the working class blue collar worker. I guess that helps Alberta considering their workforce, but any deep dive into his policies would have showed you that he didn't actually care about the workers, and we are a long way from a social creditization of the Conservative Party.
By the way, I definitely wouldn't be opposed to that. I think it would be really cool.
This issue isn't going to get solved if no one cares. No Albertan sees this as a pressing issue that it actually is, and seems like most of them actually don't really care about this. They just want the blue guy to get in more than the red guy, because every time a Conservative Prime Minister comes into office, Alberta separatism suddenly quiets down like a mouse, even though Conservatives don't ever actually do anything for them, and they're too scared of splitting the vote because they know their cringe ideas isolate them to the fringe minority, so they piggyback off the corpse of the Progressive Conservative Party in hopes of sweeping some middle-class Ontario people into their fold. Conservatives don't care. Time and time again, they would rather appease eastern provinces than actually do anything to help, because why would they? They sweep the prairies no matter what. What incentive does a Conservative Prime Minister have to help you if they know they'll win the ridings anyway, and Albertans are too scared of vote splitting to do anything? Like creating the Bloc Albertois, or some party that isn't focused on right versus left, but is actually focused on doing right by Albertans. So Albertans don't really care. Federal Conservatives don't really care. That only leaves one stooge left, Danielle Smith. Danielle Smith doesn't care. Anyone who thinks that she is doing what she's doing right now for any other reason than to distract the public from her many controversies is blind. And anyone who keeps repeating her talking point of,
Oh, I'm not in favor of Alberta separatism. I just lowered the restrictions to have a referendum right after my party face planted into the sidewalk from what was previously considered the most winnable election ever. And also, I keep mentioning that if the public wants to hold a referendum, I'm not going to stop them.
no one cares, no one cares. Conservative-leaning Albertans, if you guys keep trying to avoid any and all risk, including the risk of vote splitting, then you'll literally never get anything done. To the federal government, if you don't handle this issue like the ticking time bomb it is, then you will regret the outcome. And Danielle Smith, if you don't pass away because of a heart attack in the next 2 weeks, I'll be very sad. That's the video. No one cares at all because everyone is just too comfortable enough to not do a single thing.
Oh, my hiccups. I'm going to crash out like a bed.